All right, so when you're looking at national income, all right, you're simply talking about a nation's income. So the question that we have is, what is this national income? So from the word national, this just stands for the country, obviously, and this is income. So it's like personal income, your income that you have, but now we're looking at national. And remember, macroeconomics has to deal with the big picture where we're getting everything that is in the economy and putting it as one. So you look at microeconomics, it will be concerned with an individual's income. But when you're looking at macroeconomics, we're looking now at the incomes of everyone put together. So national income, simple definition is that it is simply the income that is accrued in a nation over a specific period of time. So income that is accrued. So to accrue just means it's like to gather, that a nation gathers over a period of time. Now you can look at income in different manners, okay, different ways. One of the ways, for example, I believe to say we all have individual accounts, individual incomes. And the same way that you can, if I was to ask you, how much money do you have? You can tell me, well, you have got money in your Airtel money, you've got some money at the bank, you've got some money at home. So we can look at your money that you have. It all belongs to you, but the same money, we can look at just the money that is in Airtel and say this is Duncan's income. So when you're looking at the aspect of national income, there are different ways in which you can look at income. But the most measure that is used for national income, the most common measure is what is called the GDP. All right, we'll look at all the others as well, but this one is the most common measure of national income. All right, so what is this GDP? All right, so GDP is simply the total market value. All right, so the total market value of all final goods, okay, of all, let me not say final, okay, let me put final goods, of all final goods and services produced in a nation. So produced in a nation within a period of time. And usually this period of time is a year, okay? So this is the definition of GDP, which I believe we are very much familiar with. So by this market value, you're just looking at what is its price, okay? What is the price of this good, okay? Are you able to get some music in the background? Okay, let me just ensure that there's no music. Okay, so by market value, we're just meaning the market value is just the price of the goods, all right? So this is the definition of GDP. Now, there are different ways in which you can, again, measure GDP. And the three ways that are there is one, we have the output. So we have the output approach, okay, to measure GDP. We'll look at all the three. Okay, number two, we have the income approach, okay? And number three, which we're going to focus on, is the expenditure approach, okay? So today we're just going to look at the expenditure approach, and then in the other two, we'll look at these two. So what is the expenditure approach, okay? So the expenditure approach to GDP, please you stop me whenever you have a question, all right? So when you're looking at the expenditure approach, all right, so the expenditure approach, you're looking at the money that is being spent. Please, those that the mics are open, please, you can close. So we have the expenditure approach. So from the word expenditure, we're looking at expenses being done in the economy. All right, so the expenditure approach to measuring GDP. So if you're looking at the expenditure approach, this approach, it sums up, okay? This is the approach that sums up. So it sums up all expenses done in the economy. So all expenses done in the economy. Okay. So now you must know the four sectors that are in the economy. All right. There are mainly four sectors that are there. The first sector is called the household sector. Okay. So in other ways, we have got this whole big economy, which can be broken down into four parts. So the first part is called the household sector. So by the household sector, we are talking about individuals like you and me, the private individuals. That's the household sector, okay? People, whatever people buy and spend in the economy, we call that the household sector. Then you have got also what is known as the business sector. So now here we're talking about business people, we're talking about firms, those people that are doing businesses. Then the other part is called the government, right? We have the government, so the government sector. Then the fourth sector that is there is the external sector. So by external sector, we are just dealing now with the aspect of imports and exports. Okay, so these are the four sectors that are there: household sector, business sector, and the government and the external sector. So here, when you're looking at the expenditure approach, we are saying, what have the households spent? Okay. Number two, we'll also add up everything that the business sector they're going to spend. So meaning, what are firms buying, right? Number three, we're also going to look at the money that is going to be spent by the government over a year. Then the fourth one, we're now going to concentrate on the external sector. Okay, so to put this now in terms of money, when households spend money on goods and services, we call this consumption. Okay, so whenever the private sector, the household sector spend income or they spend their money on anything, it can be a good, it can be a service. We record this under what is known as what? Consumption. Then what about when business people spend money? When business people spend money to buy goods or services in the economy, we call and record this money as investment. So please, investment, don't mistaken this with capital. So investment is the money that businesses spend on capital goods. We'll talk about that, capital goods. But for now, just know that when businesses spend money to buy goods and services in the economy, you record that money as what? Investment. The number three thing that we have is the government. The government can also buy goods and services, right? The government can be building a school. If government buys, for example, chairs, or they buy anything, we record that money as government expenditure. So that money that the government spends on goods and services is called government what? Expenditure. So the last one now that we have is the external sector. And under the external sector, when the external sector spends money, so we are going to record that as exports, okay, and imports. Now, here we're looking at exports. So if you come down to look at exports, we're looking at the goods and services that foreigners are buying, isn't it? So goods and services that foreigners are buying. And then look at imports. It's what we, for example, Zambians are buying from other countries, right? So that's why we define the imports and we have the exports. All right. So GDP adds up all these expenses to form now what is called the expenditure approach. So consumption here, we have C under households, we record it as C, then we say plus, the business sector spends money, we call that I, investment. Then the government spends money, we can call that as what? G. Then in the external sector here, you're going to say plus, here we call these net exports. Net exports is just the difference between exports and imports. So you're going to say net exports stands for exports minus imports. So these are called net exports. So when you get the difference of these two, you form what is known as what? Exports. So what we have here, okay, is what we call the expenditure approach method to calculating GDP. It adds up or sums up all expenses made in the economy. So by the household, C, plus the business sector, which is I, plus the government, plus the net exports, which is exports minus imports. All right. I hope that is okay. Is there any question up to this point? I am recording and I'll send this class after this, okay? No question? Everything is clear?
Yeah,
Yes?
sorry, my network has gone down. I wanted to ask about something.
About?
With households, why
Yeah.
is it consumption? Sorry, my network went out for some time.
You're asking if it's consumption?
So with households, consumption meaning they why is it that household is consumption? We
So
consume?
yes, we consume. So whatever households buy, what we get, whatever they buy, then we record that as consumption. So we call it consumption. So consumption, by definition, is the money that is spent by households on domestically produced goods and services. So when a Zambian or a foreigner, okay, who lives in Zambia, they're a resident of Zambia, isn't it? They're staying in Zambia. So I, for example, Duncan, when I go and buy a chair, you will record that as consumption. Okay. But when a business person goes and buys the same chair, we don't call it consumption. We're going to call it investment because it's money that has been spent by an investor or a firm. You get it? Same thing for the government. The government can also go and buy a chair. You won't call that as consumption. We're going to call it as what? Government expenditure. All right. All good? Okay. Probably because of network. So,
Yes.
all right. So now, in terms of measure, so GDP is one of them that we can use to measure. The other one that we have, you must get the understanding, the difference between GNP and GDP. All right. Very crucial thing. Now, the only difference here is that GDP, you saw the definition, we said is the GDP is the market value, right? So market value of all final goods and services produced where? Produced for GDP is the market value. Okay, let me just rewrite the definition. Market value of all final goods and services produced in a country, okay, produced, let me emphasize this, within the boundaries of a country. So within the boundaries of a country. So you know that we have borders and stuff. Those are boundaries of the country, isn't it? Within the boundaries of a country, within a period of time. Okay, so within a period of time. Whereas you look at GNP, we're going to say GNP, we get the same definition. It only differs at this point. Okay, this word here. This one is within the boundaries of a country, whereas GNP is the market value of all final goods and services produced by the citizens of a country. So by the citizens of a nation. Okay. What do we mean? So citizens, we mean, for example, so GDP, for example, we're going to say GDP, it doesn't matter who's producing, so long as we're producing within Zambia. So you know that in Zambia, we have Chinese, we have all these other people, and they're doing businesses in Zambia. We are going to count everything when it comes to GDP. So so long as it's produced within Zambia, we're going to count it as Zambia's GDP. Whereas GNP will only consider what Zambians have produced. And these Zambians, we're not only talking about Zambians that are living in Zambia, also the ones that are living abroad. So, for example, Duncan, I can be working in Namibia, and if I'm working in Namibia, the money that I make, I can send to Zambia. So that money that every Zambian is making across the world, GNP is going to include it. Is that okay? So what happens is GDP, okay, there's a formula now that these two have. We'll say GNP is equal to, we get the GDP, then we're going to subtract something that is called the net factor income from abroad. It's called like this. It should be FIA. So net factor income from abroad. Okay. Now I want you to know what this net factor income from abroad is. All right. So let me begin it from there so that you understand it more. So remember, this is the formula. GNP is equal to GDP plus net factor income from abroad. All right. So what is this net factor income from abroad? Now, net factor income from abroad, let me just define it. So the net factor income from abroad okay. Now, here's the thing. I want you to imagine yourself, you're working outside the country, or let me use myself, okay? I'm a Zambian, all right? Duncan, we know is a Zambian. I work abroad. So let's say I work, so Zambian working abroad. Okay, then let's say we have another person who's a foreigner. Let's say is South African. South African working in Zambia. Okay, so we have these two people that are here. So if a Zambian works, he has a family and stuff, the Zambian is working abroad. Let's say he's working in South Africa, all right? Okay, in South Africa. So what happens here is this net factor income from abroad, we're going to say, how much is Duncan making who's abroad? So if Duncan is working abroad, let's say I'm working in South Africa, and I earn, let's say, a 2,500 every month. Okay, this 2,500 is the money that is called factor income from abroad. Okay, so it is income that is coming to Zambia. That's why we're saying factor income from abroad. Okay, because it is from outside the country, it is now coming inside the country. So you call this money that the Zambians are making, who are living outside, are making. Okay, so in other ways, let me even just, I think I forgot to mention this. What is factor income? So factor income is just the income that is earned. So maybe you can just write that, factor income. Okay, so factor income is income. So this is income earned from the factors of production. From the factors of production. Okay, I think we need to do an introduction course so that I can define even these terms of factors of production. So from the factors of production. Now, these factors of production are just things that we use to produce goods and services. In other ways, I can call them as materials. Okay, for example, if you're baking cake, if you're baking a cake, you need eggs, you need sugar, you need flour. So it means those things are going to consider them as the things that we're going to use. You need an oven, you need human power. So the things that we use to make goods and services, we call them factors of production. So now there are basically 4 factors of production. Hope we know. I think I'll need to do an introductory class with you guys. So there are 4 factors of production. And the first one is called labor, which is the most common, right? Labor. So labor is just the human effort that we put in when you work at the end of the month. So when you work, you're selling your labor. At the end of the month, there's something that you earn. You call it what? A salary. So a salary is simply a factor income, is an example of a factor income, because it is income that is earned from the factor of what? Production. Okay. So when you are talking about factor incomes, just know it's the money that we are earning from factors of production. I hope we are okay with that. So now let me continue with this example. So we have here a Zambian that is working abroad, all right, in South Africa, and the money that they're earning comes to Zambia, right? So we're going to call it factor income from abroad. Now we also have a South African who's working. They're they're in Zambia, but they're South African. When they make their money, let's say this one now is earning 500 kwacha. So this 500 kwacha is called factor income. Now, since it's going to go to South Africa, we're going to say factor income to abroad. Okay, so there's factor income from abroad, factor income to abroad. So these two, when you get the difference, you get now what is known as net. So this one has got net. Whenever you hear the word net, it means we are subtracting something. So net factor income from abroad, it means we're going to get these two, the difference of these two. So we're going to say factor income from abroad. So the formula is going to be net factor income from abroad is equal to net. It's going to be net factor income, okay? Factor income from abroad, okay? So net factor income from abroad minus, sorry, not net here. You don't use the word net. Net is for this one, the first one. So here we're just going to say it is factor income, okay? So it's just factor income from abroad minus factor income to abroad, okay? So net factor income from abroad, it looks like we're talking about the same thing. Huh? So net factor income from abroad is equal to factor income from abroad minus factor income to abroad. And I hope we've gotten the difference between the two. All right, so in the quiz that you had, they already did this minus. That's why they only gave us net factor income from abroad. So meaning this value here of net factor income from abroad, it can be positive or negative, right? So if we were to calculate it here, what's our net factor income from abroad? We look at the factor income from abroad here, we said it's 25, right? So we're going to say 2,500 minus, what's the net factor income to abroad? It's 500. So in this case, we're just going to have what? A 2,000. Okay, so it can be negative if this factor income to abroad is greater, isn't it? So let's say we had this one as 600, and then this one, let's say we just had a 500 like this. So it means we would have done what? It would have been 500 minus 600, meaning we would have what? Negative 100, of which I think we had a negative something in the test, right? So that's how you get these values. So if they ask you to calculate GDP, always know we have the relationship that exists between GDP and GNP, and that is the one that is above here. Is that okay? Any question? So I hope we're okay with the difference between GNP and GDP, and this is very much clear. Okay. So I just want to give you the last part. I think I have 7 minutes, then we can look at one question. Then I can give you the other one just to look at it in terms of an example. All right. So do one question, then I'll give you an example. So now let me talk about something that is very crucial as well, and that is what is called GDP at market price, GDP at basic price, and GDP at factor cost. Now GDP at market price, so GDP at market price, okay, just lost some connection. So GDP at market price, you can define it if you're writing down as GDP that is calculated at the current prices. So GDP that is calculated at the current prices is known as what? GDP at market price. I hope that is okay. So what do we mean by market price? Market price, we just mean the price that is prevailing in the market. So if, for example, you go to Pick and Pay and you find that Vatra is 5 kwacha, that means 5 kwacha is the market price. Okay. If you go and find whatever, every good has got a market price. Market price are usually the prices that these shopping malls use. Okay, they sell goods at their market prices. So for example, right now there's a market price for chicken, of which I believe the market price for chicken should be like 90 kwacha. And you find out that overall, everyone agrees that yes, chickens are 90 kwacha. So this is the market price. Okay, so that's GDP at market price. Is GDP that is calculated at the current price. Okay, so if you go to Pick and Pay, like I gave you an example, you find that if you buy a bottle of Vatra, they will give you a receipt, and if they say Vatra, they give us, for example, they say it's 5 kwacha. Usually they'll write VAT, which is the value added tax. They'll say probably it was 16%, maybe let's say it was 2 kwacha. So meaning Pick and Pay originally were selling this Vatra at, let's say, 3 kwacha, but plus the tax, it comes out now to be at what? At 5 kwacha. So you call this 5 kwacha that the consumer buys the good at as market price. Okay. I hope that is okay. So let me differentiate this now from what is called GDP at basic price. It's just that in your test, it was not there. So GDP at basic price is simply the GDP. So GDP at basic price is equal to GDP at market price. So you get the market price, then you say minus indirect taxes. So indirect taxes are just taxes on goods and services. Okay. So this is very important for you to know. So GDP at market price is just equal to GDP at basic price, sorry. GDP at basic price is equal to GDP at market price minus indirect taxes. So look at this. If, for example, you go to, I said Pick and Pay, and they're charging you 5 kwacha for the pot of water, then tax itself, if you watch closely to the, if you watch closely at the receipt, you'll find they write the VAT, and let's say the VAT was 16%, and let's say it was 2 kwacha. Meaning, if it wasn't for the tax, Pick and Pay would have sold you this Vatra at 3 kwacha instead of the 5 kwacha. So the original price without tax is 3 kwacha. So when you calculate GDP now, instead of using 5 kwacha in calculating, you use 3 kwacha. It means you are removing tax. So that type of GDP, which is calculated without the influence of tax, we call that as GDP at basic price. Okay, I hope that is okay. Now let's move on to the last one. The last one is called GDP at factor cost. So now GDP at factor cost is the GDP at market price. Okay, so they all start with market price. And then we're going to say minus the indirect taxes. Then so indirect taxes. Then what will differentiate this one? We're going to say plus subsidies. So plus subsidies. Okay. So GDP at factor cost will be GDP at market price minus indirect taxes plus what? Subsidies. In other ways, we can write this formula as, if you look at this closely, GDP at market price minus indirect taxes, we know it's basic price, right? We can say GDP at factor cost is equal to, we can say GDP at what? Basic price plus subsidies. This is what we call GDP at factor cost. It is the same thing. So if you get what is on top here or what is down, all these are the same. So GDP at basic price plus subsidies is GDP at factor cost. Or if you get GDP at market price, this is just the same here. So that is that. I hope we are all good with this. After this, I think we can answer the questions that are that were in the test paper. I think now you can look at them differently. Is that okay? That's GDP at market price, GDP at basic price, GDP at factor cost. Okay, you guys are so quiet on me, so I don't know if I'm saying the right things or I'm getting you lost. I hope everybody's getting clear.
Following.
All right, I still have 1 minute before this class cuts, so I'll send you another link just to do one or two examples over these things, okay? But in this 1 minute, let me utilize it just to show you this. If we have been given gross domestic product, okay, and they ask you to find what is called net domestic product. So when it becomes net, the only thing that has changed is this G. We've removed the G and put the N, which is called net. It means from the G, they have subtracted one thing that is called depreciation. So anything, whether it's GNP, whatever, if they remove the G and they put the N, you just replace here, you get the GDP, you subtract depreciation, then you form what is called the net. So it means now it will cease to be called GDP, it will be called NDP. So long as you just subtract depreciation. So let's do an example of this, then you understand over these things more. So all about what we're going to do now is just do the application of everything. So I'm going to resend another link because Zoom